Good evening from New York. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS. The gentleman next to me is Floyd Haynes. Floyd Haynes is a Guyanese born professional with 30 plus years of senior and executive level experience. He's a certified public accountant who holds an MSc in financial economics from the University of Oxford and a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He's an adjunct professor in finance and accounting at the University of the District of Columbia and a public lecturer in leadership and management. I could go on and on with Floyd's stellar bio, but I want to get this point in before we get started with the show. Floyd and I grew up together, and you can't imagine what this means to me. And you guys know I've interviewed all sorts of people, I've interviewed friends of mine and so on. But this story here tonight, as it unfolds, you realize why it's so important that we have a platform to tell our stories. Floyd has an interesting, beyond that, a remarkable story, and I hope it comes out in this conversation tonight. What I like to do when I have conversations with people, because and simply because I believe that each of one is a gem. Each one of us is a gem with many facets. But oftentimes, people only get to see one or two facets and they form an opinion. What I like to do with a conversation is to twist the gem and expose the various facets. And by the end of the conversation, hopefully, you get a more multidimensional perspective of who this person is. So let's begin. Floyd, welcome to CWS.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Selwyn.
I Let me just dive right into
Let's do it.
it. When friends and family, those close to you, describe you, what do you usually agree with?
Um, well, it's given my background and the journey I've been blessed to travel. It's a very difficult question to answer because I sometimes I don't see myself the way others see me.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm just humbled and happy to have been given an opportunity to do the things I've been able to do and accomplish the things I've been able to
I understand. I'm glad to hear that. You were born in Guyana, obviously. Take us
accomplish. Absolutely.
back. Take us back, Floyd, to a Floyd at 9 years old, and then a Floyd at 16 years old growing up in Guyana.
Oh man, I often say Guyana is sort of the best place to have grown up in at the time I grew up. Of course, there are sort of two experiences, and the way you teed up the question actually describes the two periods or sets up the two periods nicely. So, as a young man in Campbellville growing up, Guyana was an idyllic sort of experience for me as a young man at 9. I would say from about 8, 9, all the way to about 13, 14. It was something of fun. I mean, we did what most other young folks did. We played cricket, we played football, tennis, you name it. Any game we could get to play, we played it. Sometimes we didn't even have the tools to play it, but we would make up the tools. We'd make the balls, make the bats, get something together, string it together, call it a football, and go play. But in addition to that, man, we would go into what is called the back down. Right? We had sort of a backlands where the old sugar plantation where they grew cane and coconuts and so on and so forth. And a group of us, we were a group that we hung out together, we did everything together. It was a group of us in the neighborhood. Everybody knew everybody. So I knew all of the other kids on the block. They knew us. Our house was sort of like the base. They all came to our house, which is in Dennis Street, Campbellville. Everybody congregated there. And from there, we sort of went on and we did our thing. So we would go swimming. We would go um, picking sugar cane. We would go climbing coconut trees, uh, stealing fruits from neighbor's yard. I mean, it was that kind of fun thing. We did everything together. We invented and created everything. And it was an interesting time because my particular situation and most of the young men at that time in the neighborhood, we sort of grew up, without a father. My dad was there, but he wasn't really there. And when he was there, most of the time he was probably drunk. So we all grew up in what would be considered single household today. But then we didn't think of it like that because we grew up as young men and we learned from the older boys in the community. So the older boys were sort of like the father figure, and they taught us to do everything. And it was such that you couldn't come into that neighborhood and did anything to the younger kids because the older boys had our backs. I mean, that was the kind of thing. They were, every older boy was every younger boy's big brother. They taught us to swim. I mean, I remember my first time going up to what was then the 40 feet. It was a big canal trench right in Campbellville. And we all would go there to swim. And I remember stepping up there and one of the old guys said, jump in. And I said, what? He said, no, go ahead, jump. You could do it. But it's that kind of thing that we grew up, that sort of motivation, camaraderie, the togetherness. And it was just sort of a life of fun. Every day was something different to do. Every single day we experimented with different ideas, different things. And it was all just so much fun. Now, fast forward that. By the time I got to about 16, things had begun to change, right? The country was going through a very rough period. Um, things had gotten very austere. There weren't things in the store. I mean, the politics had gotten really bad, and those were very, very different times. Um, it was a time when also it was coming of age. You're a young man, you're getting your first girlfriend, your first kiss, and those kinds of things. And I remember the soundtrack of those days. Bob Marley had invaded Guyana, and reggae had invaded, and everything was cool. The whole vernacular was, making heights and making tracks and that kind of thing, I, and the whole thing had changed. But there was also a serious time in that those were the times you were beginning to think about your future. And for me, as a young man in Campbellville at the time, because things were so tough, I could have gone one of either way. I could have gone to the life of hustling. Some of the younger guys were hustling because of, now you're older, you want to dress, you want to wear things, you want nice things, you can't afford it, you don't have a job. You look for the fastest way to get there. And I could have gone that route either. Um, I happen to have gone a different route. A gentleman by the name of Prior Jonas saw me and had expressed an interest in me and sort of offered to mentor me. And I would think that was a major turning point in my life. Prior had me go to his office almost weekly. He was working at office of the Prime Minister then, Parliament Buildings. He was an internal auditor. And I would go and sit with Prior and he would teach me mathematics and those kinds of things. He was the most amazing person I had ever met at that time. And he taught me discipline, he taught me integrity, honesty. But he also gave me some skills in mathematics that I never thought about before, how to approach problem solving. For him, math was more than just a subject. It was an approach to life. And that's what Prior was able to bring out to me. And so having gone that route, I became sort of his understudy. And then ultimately, he brought me in at OPM to work. It was my first job. I worked at OPM as a junior accountant. And that was the turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm. So, Prior Jonas, you mentioned your dad. Who are some others in the community that you looked up to at the time that made an impact on you that you can remember?
Well, Selwyn, that's a tough question, man, because at the time, there really weren't. I mean, some of the guys have gone on to do other things, but at the time, there really weren't many role models in the community. Most of my role models would have been footballers.
All right.
I admire some of the fellas that play football. I ultimately joined the Pile Football Club and started playing football. I was actually pretty good. I played for Guyana under 17 against Suriname and Trinidad. I was pretty good football player. But most of the people that I admired would have been football players. I wanted to be a footballer. I wanted to play for Guyana. I wasn't thinking much beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, my hero is my mom. Now, here is a lady, Selwyn, who, without any formal education, raised 5 kids, 3 boys, 2 girls, without any formal education, without any stable source of income, and raised 5 children successfully on her own. That's my hero. It doesn't get any better than that. I
Yeah.
tell her every chance I get.
What is your favorite memory of her?
My favorite memory of my mom is her waking us up every morning to pray and give thanks.
To pray.
To pray and give thanks.
Wow.
And it's a very, as a young kid, you don't really appreciate the meaning because to begin with, we didn't have a lot to be thankful for. But this woman found something to be thankful for every single day.
Let's do this. Let's try this. Let's take an arc forward many years later. You're a brilliant guy, you're accomplished, you're a very reflective person. Let's go there. You reflect on your childhood, this every morning getting up and pray. What what connection did you make about that rhythm or that ritual that your mother placed you guys on? How did it help impact you, or how did you feel it impacted you as an adult?
It's a very good question, but it actually dovetails nicely with what I do, which is I mentor and I teach
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. But for me, what I got out of that was that you have to be thankful for life.
Yes.
The fact that you wake up every day without any health ailments, without any major problems, you have the power to change that day. And that's sort of what came out of those prayers. And so, rather than look for the material things, what my mom was basically saying is that your currency is your life.
Mm.
When you wake up every day with life, you've got the world ahead of you. And what that did, it created in me a sense of agency. And that is, when we think of what is an agent is someone who does something for you. Well, why not why not be the agent for yourself? And so what my mom in doing those prayer sessions was basically saying to us, you've got life. The rest of it is entirely up to you. You don't have a lot of money, you don't have means, you don't have connections, you don't have all of those things. But you don't have to end it there. You can take control of your tomorrow. She used to say, my mom used to say, she said, draw a line down the middle of the page and then look back. That's already happened. You can't do anything about what happened. But look forward. None of it is written yet, and you have the opportunity to write it all. You can write tomorrow. And therefore, that's a sense of empowerment, it's a sense of agency. And
Do you,
that's my connection.
do you remember any time in your adult life, any situation that those words were never more truer, never more impactful? Do you remember? Was there you don't have to describe the situation, but have you ever been in a situation where you reflected on those words and realized and said, "Well, I am really glad that my mom taught me this."
Oh, absolutely. When my first business I started um, was in an accounting firm, and I developed the firm and got it up to a reasonable size. And I was in partnership with another fella, and we had a falling out, and he sued me.
Mm.
He was sort of another mentor, another good friend of mine that I met. I worked for him, then I went off and started my own thing, and he joined me to sort of help me get launched. And we had a misunderstanding, and he sued me, took me to court. It became a little ugly, and I've always said I could deal with anything. I can deal with failure. I can deal with not being prepared. I can deal with a lot of things, but I was never prepared to deal with what I thought was betrayal.
Mm.
And it's at that point I had to reach back to the things that mom would have placed in me. And that is, tomorrow can always be better than today. Look forward. Don't look back. keeping on. Look to the future. You can change the future. We went to court. We went to arbitration. We settled it. I moved on and grew the company bigger and better. Classic case of, you can, when things happen, you can look back, you can wallow in despair, you can be upset about it, you can do a lot of things. But the question is, what are you prepared to do going forward?
Uh-huh.
Because that's the only thing you have control of.
What exactly, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I really want to get into the meat of Floyd. But I'm curious, what exactly did you learn about yourself with that experience?
I learned that I was resilient.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that I can take a knock and I can get knocked down and get up back. And I learned never to give up, never to quit.
What
That as
almost,
long as you have a goal,
uh-huh.
a passion, and you have the desire to push on through, you'll get there.
What are most people surprised to learn about you when they get to know you, Floyd?
I think so, and it comes from various sources. If you knew me when I was stopper, which is what most people knew me as my football name. If you knew me as stopper, probably I'm a little bigger, put on a little weight. But more importantly, I'm not playing soccer, and so people are probably surprised that this young man from Campbellville. I mean, listen. The fact of the matter is, Selwyn, you know this. I grew up in a situation that can best be described as bankruptcy of opportunity. Right? There were no opportunities for a young man in Campbellville.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You grow up, and you either get a job with the government, or you go hustler or something like that, or you play football and still try to eke out a living. Right? So a lot of people are surprised that coming out of an environment like that I would be able to turn it around and make myself successful, and go on to achieve the kind of academic achievements I've made, and as well as an entrepreneur and businessman.
But talking about coming out of Campbellville, you migrated to the U.S.
Yeah.
What surprised you about America in those early days when you first came?
When I first came to America, so I wasn't really prepared. I wasn't prepared for America at the time. But what really surprised me, well, there was a couple of things. Let me set this up. So when I left, my mom had just gotten through. I think my aunt had sent for her, and then my mom, and at the time, remember now, Guyana was at a rough time, so everybody was getting out. And so once we got through, I mean, I was overly elated. I was happy. And I remember coming to America, and the one thing I thought about is that I've gotten out. I can't go back.
Mm.
There was nothing to go back to. And that in and of itself became my drive, my motivation, my source of motivation. Because every time I thought about quitting or stopping, I would ask myself, what am I going to go back to? Go back to Campbellville and do what? There was not an alternative. And in the face of those odds, you have to soldier on. And so, what I learned very quickly is that, people say America is a land of opportunity, but it's what you make of it. But for the first time, I was in an environment where I could dream big. There was no limit to what I can dream. And if I worked hard enough, I can accomplish those dreams. But I'll tell you something, Selwyn. I learned this over the years, right? So, and you'll hear me come back to this whole agency thing. But it's very, very important. I teach it a lot in my leadership courses. But, I came to America, and I was meeting Americans, hanging out, talking to them, associating with them. And I realized that the average American that I was interacting with had a better sense of agency. And what I mean by that, you take a kid out of Guyana, and you put them in a classroom and you give them a math or an English test, and they will score as high, if not better, than that American kid. academic, pure academic performance. But then take that same individual and put them out there and ask them to go and start a business or create something or build something, and they freeze. And that is because we weren't given this sense of agency, the idea that you are your own agent and you can do whatever you dream of. You have the ability to make your dreams come true. And that is, in other words, you're not waiting for someone to do it for you. The idea that you can do it is something that I found profoundly refreshing when I came to America. And that is something I don't think, I certainly didn't get it coming out of Guyana. I was pretty smart. I mean, like I said, I knew math and English and I could quote Shakespeare backwards and forwards and that kind of thing. But I didn't know anything about, but the idea of owning your own business wasn't something in my, well, that's not something I thought about at all. And so for me, that was a major, major difference in coming to America. And once I realized that, you know, Steve Jobs, in one of his speeches, he put it this way. He said, listen, when you look around you and you see all the things that are around you, and then once you realize that those things are created by people no much different than you, he said, once you realize that, you would never be the same. And that's exactly what happened to me when I came to America. I realized I could do anything. You know, I realized I could do just about anything if I had the will, the desire, and I was prepared to do the hard work. You got to do the work now. Got to do the work. There's no secret sauce. There's no magic.
We're gonna come back to this whole thing about agency, but I want to explore your academic trajectory a little bit. Here's this boy from Campbellville, a
Yep.
place that is a desert of opportunities or lacking sparse, no opportunities at all. And you end up in Oxford and
Yep.
you end up in Harvard. So I want to ask you this question. How did growing up in Campbellville, the culture of Campbellville's government school, prepare you for America, but most importantly, for studies or studying at Harvard or Oxford?
Well, you know, one thing about Guyana, it prepares you, it gives you a very strong academic preparation. I mean, the educational system in Guyana at that time was tight. I mean, you knew your sums, you knew your math, you knew your English, your
Yes.
lit, your history, and so on, right? So I came out with what I would think was the academic preparation. I was always a pretty strong student, so you know, I had that in me. All I needed was opportunity. Because you know, at the time in Guyana, even if you had the smarts, you had the academic preparation, the opportunities are so limited. Only a select few will get through.
Mm-hmm.
Now you come to America where there's no limit. You can apply to him. Like, you know, my uncle said, you know, you can apply to college. I says, well, okay, which college do I apply to? He says, whichever one you want. I mean, is that, can you imagine that sense of freedom that you could apply to a university? I mean, you in Campbellville, you growing up, you don't think of that. You see university as something that other people go to.
You're right.
That sense that you too belong in a university. So now you come to a place where, I mean, Washington, D.C., there's all these various schools. Of course, you know, D.C. has a long history of West Indian and Caribbean people going to Howard University. So naturally I went there. And you know, I studied accounting, graduated at the top of the class, and then went on and wrote for the CPA, the Certified Public Accounting exam. Um, After my CPA, I sort of worked a few jobs, and I was always sort of not fulfilled, you know.
Mm.
I went from one job to the next, and I did well. I mean, I always got good jobs, move up to manager and that kind of thing. And in one of my jobs, I sort of sat back and I said, okay, well, what do I really want to do? And so I decided, well, I'm going to apply to graduate school. So I flirted with, you know, law school, just different kinds of schools. And, you know, I applied to Oxford and got accepted.
What was that like?
Man, let me tell you, because, you know, growing up in Ghana, you always hear, you know, Oxford and Cambridge, you know,
Yes.
I mean, Harvard and these things are good, but in Guyana, I guess it's because we are a former British colony. I mean, the Guyana scholars will go to Cambridge or Oxford and those Um, I wasn't anything close to being a scholar, so I mean, I didn't think that was my calling. But I applied and got on a plane and flew to Heathrow, and then took a taxi up to Oxford. And let me tell you, it was transformative. I'd
Uh-huh.
never been. I mean, everything about the city spells or suggests academic
Wow.
academia, the whole thing.
Mm.
Fires coming up out of the sky. I mean, the Gothic buildings. I mean, it's you know, and so it was. It really was a mecca for learning. Um, and so I went there, did a master's in financial economics. Um, at the time, I had started my business. I'd started an accounting firm, which I had, had grown somewhat, but we weren't as successful as where we would ultimately become. Um, so I did that. Then I came back, worked in my firm a little bit more, built up my firm, got it up to about 200, 250 employees. And at that time, I decided I'm going to take a break. So I applied to Harvard, and just sort of sitting around applying. I've always been somewhat of a curious kid and curious person anyway, and I like knowledge, I like learning, I like challenging myself. So I applied to Harvard, and I actually forgot I applied. And one day I'm leaving home, and I said, let me check the mailbox. So I checked the mailbox. I was living in the Washington area, Bethesda, Maryland. And I saw a letter that says, "Congratulations, you blah, blah, blah." I mean, I was like, wow. Like, wow. So I went on to work, sat down a little bit, reflect upon it. My business was doing really well, so I had to make a very difficult call because it would take me away from work for at least a year. So I met with my senior managers and began to put things in place. Once I was comfortable that they can keep it going, at least for that year, then I decided I was going to go. So I put things in place, packed up my stuff, gave up my apartment, took the next flight out to Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Wow.
I was on at Harvard.
Why why business? Where did you get this bug to start your own firm, to do your own business? Where did that come
Um, it came from a lot of things, and I would probably say some of that is Campbellville. I
from?
mean, some of that is growing up when in an environment where we sort of did our own thing.
Yes.
I mean, there was no limit. We did our own thing, and so you grew up with that independence. You had to do it anyway. We had to do everything for ourselves, and so you learn how to be independent and how to talk about chances and risks. We took them every day. And living was a risk. So I suppose I had some of that in me, and it just came out as I got older, and I got the tools to be able to do it. But I was restless as an employee. Um, I find that I didn't like prescribed order, and I didn't like 9 to 5, and there's so many things that factored into it. I realized that I was putting in a lot of time doing really great work, and somebody else was reaping the benefit. And so I said, well, why couldn't I do that for me? And so that kind of thing began to provoke thought. And one thing led to the next, and ultimately I opened my own business.
you know,
And
it,
I was a certified public accountant, so that was
wow.
the best. That was the best business to go into. Why not offer accounting services to the general public?
Floyd, there's um, a common term that people use a lot. Two words: they or others. And there are those, depending on what side of the tracks you grew up, would say, or in our case, the trench or son would say, who is they? There's no they, there's no others. But never ever is it more present than when you grew up in a certain environment um, without much. You know what the others are, and you know who they are.
Yep.
And at some point in your life, Floyd, and you mentioned it a little bit just now when you first went to Cambridge, that not Cambridge to Oxford, that you became one of the others.
Yes.
What was that really like? Because we often don't think about it. You become part of it, and then it becomes the norm. What was what was that like for you?
It was eye opening in many respects, and it sort of corroborated the notion that we create artificial barriers in society,
Mm-hmm.
and we divide people into groups. And Guyana is very, still is very class based society, and so Guyana have classes. If you're not in a certain class, then you're not expected to do certain things. But it what Oxford me getting to Oxford helped me understand that those things are artificial, and that if a young man from Camberville could find his way to Oxford, then the possibilities for everybody is unlimited. They just don't know that it's unlimited. They don't have the tools, they don't have the knowledge. But if given the knowledge and the tools, I am not exceptional. There are lots of young men in Campbellville who, if were given the opportunity, would probably could do the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I learned. Um, it, I didn't think I was in a special club. I got some good breaks and I made good on my breaks, and I worked hard. I put in the work. You got to do the work. You got to do the work. There's no shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that when you grow up in Guyana, for example, you think of places like Cambridge and Oxford as places for a select few. Those are places reserved for a select few who are endowed by the Creator with certain gifts. you know, and and along comes me who wasn't born with any of those things, and still made it. So what does that say about the system? And I think it's loud and clear that a lot of the barriers, the social barriers, are artificial and probably ought to be torn down anyway.
Let's take a quick break, but when we get back, I really want you to get into this notion of tools and excuse me, and how tools impact opportunity.
Terrific, terrific.
All right.
Sounds good.